Now, there is no doubt about it that Snow White 2025 is considered by far one of the worst box office failures, not just with Disney, but also in the entire film history when it comes down to live-action remakes. We already know that it's right up there with, of course, Dragon Ball Evolution on the IMDb rating score.
Nobody believed Disney's newest reimagining of Snow White could crash so spectacularly.
So with Snow White, let's go through this, right? There's no prince. Woman doesn't need a prince.
Oh, Lord.
Really? Okay. Good
Shut
luck back then. It doesn't need a prince to save her, and not surrounded by 7 weird people. Oh, okay, just CGI fictional goblins, I guess.
Yet that's exactly what fans watched happen when Rachel Zegler took center stage, only to serve up blunt remarks about the original 1937 classic.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about
she's gonna die.
true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
The actress's statements painted the much-loved fairy tale as backwards and weird, triggering a widespread backlash from Disney devotees who admire the movie that catapulted Walt Disney's empire into global fame.
That the producers, far left-wing activists in Hollywood, are turning on her, and Disney has canceled all of Rachel Zegler's appearances on their media platforms. Kind of tough.
Overnight, the entire project turned toxic in the eyes of critics and audiences alike.
And there is no resolution in sight for the Walt Disney Company when it comes to Snow White 2025 at the box office. This is exactly why Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, is in pure panic mode over not just the Rachel Zegler backlash, but the entire backlash surrounding this movie in general.
Rumor now has it the studio might skip showcasing the film on Disney+, distancing itself from the fiasco, while insiders point to a possible new Snow White film, this time without Rachel.
It basically, this movie was like you took the original Snow White and just put everything through this filter of liberalism. It wasn't through a filter of Japanese anime, it was through a filter of liberalism.
We'll dive into how it all fell apart, why so many fingers are aimed at her, and what Disney might do to rescue its oldest princess from a sea of negative buzz.
To go out and badmouth everybody and talk smack about, older movies in the same franchise, the canon story, I guess?
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. I feel like they would have had better control over that.
That despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them.
She's a good actress.
That at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.
Wow. The ego on this girl is ridiculous.
Wow. Tell me if this has attracted you. Like, does this, imagine you invested into her being the face of the movie, and she's the main character and she's trying to promote the movie. Would this make you want to go watch the movie?
There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Disney responded by scaling back the premiere. I don't know that anyone really showed up to the premiere. The Rotten Tomatoes reviews are looking pretty bad, and they did, it seems like they tried to tweak a few things, but this movie is bad.
Snow White holds a special place in Disney's lineage. It's not just a cartoon, it's the movie that turned Walt Disney into a household name and set the stage for every princess story that followed. Historically, anytime the studio revisits a beloved title, success feels practically guaranteed, so the sudden collapse of this adaptation caught everyone off guard.
This girl took the money and then decided that she wanted to go out there and, you know what, I'm gonna take my stand. Well, you should have made that stand before you took the money to promote a film, because that's not in line with your job description.
Right.
Early promotional material hinted at big changes, like drastically reducing the dwarfs' roles or sidelining the prince to modernize the plot. But everything blew up when Rachel Zegler repeatedly criticized the original film's outdated nature, making it sound as though the classic's whimsical romance and innocent charm were worthless.
I think this is their policies coming back to bite them. They went woke.
Yeah.
She went out and said stuff woke that was going to hurt the film. They couldn't come out and go against her, because then you're going after somebody for saying what you say you believe.
Fans who'd grown up cherishing Snow White's wide-eyed optimism couldn't fathom why the new star had such a harsh outlook on what they consider an untouchable piece of animation history. Anger ballooned, overshadowing any excitement about the updated storyline, overshadowing any hype about set designs or new songs, overshadowing basically the entire marketing campaign. It was as if the negativity around her remarks consumed whatever goodwill the project might have had.
But at the same time, I think going forward, they're going to be like, hey, shut up.
Yeah.
Tight-lipped. Otherwise, guess what? We're clawing back some money.
Yeah. This would have been a lot better if they, had a strong male along with her, a prince, if it wasn't about socialism.
Ordinarily, you'd imagine a Disney princess lead exuding warmth and affection for her movie's source material. But from the moment Rachel told interviewers she found Snow White odd, the trust fans usually place in a Disney protagonist started to crack. If you watch the older cartoon, you see the sweetness and innocence that launched countless fairy tale trends, an innocence that for many people is downright iconic.
I think they could have done all that woke shit. You want to call woke? They could have done all that still. And as long as she had gone out and been like, well, we just have a different story. I like the old story, but we're doing a different one this time.
You're probably right.
The backlash would have been 10 times.
Yes. You're probably right.
Hearing the newest lead brush it off as silly struck a nerve. Then came more quotes. The prince is basically a creeping bystander who appears out of nowhere. The 1937 storyline is irrelevant, and so on. Before long, the actress had become the magnet for all the annoyance fans felt about shifting too far from the original's heart. Even watchers who support moderate updates to older Disney films found her approach grating.
Jonah Platt, whose father helped produce the latest Snow White film, had some very harsh words for star Rachel Zegler.
For context, Variety wrote a report recently titled Inside Disney's Snow White Fiasco, Death Threats, Beefed Up Security, and a Social Media Guru for Rachel Zegler.
It wasn't that she wanted to empower Snow White with modern ideals. Everyone's on board with that. Instead, it was the dismissive tone that read as insulting to everything the cartoon stands for.
It just takes a beloved movie and makes it much more boring and much less realistic. The movie is really, really bad.
By the time the film actually hit theaters, the negativity overshadowed it to the point where many refused to give it a chance. They saw the lead star publicly mocking a piece of cinematic history that shaped their childhood memories. That's how Rachel, intentionally or not, became the villain in the eyes of furious viewers. People in the industry say that once the negative buzz took off, Disney executives were in emergency mode.
But the primary suffering is being sent in by my company to watch a children's movie as a single man, like 2 p.m. on a Thursday. That was the first part that was a little bit weird, but I was basically the only person in the theater.
They tried last-minute script modifications, allegedly attempting to salvage the dwarfs' roles or highlight some beloved aspects of the original cartoon. But that often leads to a half-baked result, with scenes that feel pasted in at the final minute. Test screenings apparently showed lukewarm reactions, not just to the changes, but to the entire production's energy.
Very few people wanted to see this. Even the little kids who like Disney movies, even they don't seem to be turning up in droves for the movie because the movie is really, really bad.
Meanwhile, top bosses realized Rachel's interviews had gone viral in the worst way. They might have hoped she'd generate progressive headlines or fresh angles, but her remarks came off as brash, hurting the final product more than helping it. With every new trailer or TV spot, fans hammered the studio online, repeating her quotes and fueling the negativity.
And so I've got some bona fides here on being fair. The movie was absolutely terrible.
Production staff who once hoped for a triumphant release described feeling stuck between an actress who disliked the source material and an audience that adored it. The mismatch couldn't have been more obvious. Normally, a big theatrical Disney release transitions to Disney Plus with fanfare, a big homepage banner, social media blasts, the works. That synergy drives subscriptions, letting families watch the film again at home. In this case, rumor has it that the fiasco was intense enough for Disney to consider keeping the movie off the service, at least for a while.
In every way that the movie differed from the beloved 1937 original, it was worse.
Why put a project front and center if it's only going to reignite criticism and sour subscribers on the platform? From a marketing standpoint, featuring the film after so many months of negative press might remind everyone just how off the rails this adaptation went. If the star's negativity remains fresh in fans' minds, a Disney Plus launch could attract a wave of snarky reviews, memes, or more boycotts.
So from the casting to the class politics, the sexual politics, the regime politics, everything about it was liberal.
If you think that's an exaggeration, just look at how quickly social media picks up old controversies. A single tweet referencing Rachel's old interview clips would be enough to cause new waves of dissatisfaction. And that's the last thing Disney wants for a streaming service trying to present itself as a one-stop feel-good hub.
Is generally understood to be a very, very white person. And in this case, they decided, nope, no, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't think that's...
Some watchers believe the film will show up eventually, maybe with no big promotional push, quietly placed on the platform. Others suspect the fiasco was so damaging that Disney might bury it for a significant stretch, hoping memories fade. Either scenario is unusual for a major adaptation that presumably cost a small fortune. But these are unusual circumstances. A classic brand overshadowed by an actress's outspoken dismissal of the story that built Disney's legacy.
Snow White. We're allowed to say that, right? I was referring to the movie as sand beige, but it's no really knock on her. If you did the autobiography of Malcolm X, would you cast Tom Hanks? If you remade Moana, would you cast a little Irish guy? No, you wouldn't. So that was off the top.
In the face of a public disappointment, many fans concluded the only solution is to recast Snow White entirely, ignoring this fiasco-laden adaptation. They want someone who not only can act and sing, but who also adores or at least publicly reveres the 1937 film's groundbreaking place in animation. The logic is simple. You can't lead a nostalgic fairy tale if you treat the original like garbage.
It is not racist to suggest that a character who is described in the original as skin white as snow, that is literally how the character is described in the original, that's a character description in the same way that, as you mentioned, in Moana.
That's how names like Emma Stone or Margot Robbie started floating around. Both are big enough to overshadow lingering negativity, and both have shown they can handle whimsical or comedic aspects without mocking the source. Whether Disney actually does a second attempt remains speculation.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Some watchers guess the fiasco was so big they have no choice but to let Snow White rest for a while. Others say Disney can't afford to let its oldest princess remain tainted by negativity. A new actress praising the cartoon's sweet innocence might be the easiest way to reassure fans. After all, the fiasco primarily came from Rachel's harsh commentary, so removing that commentary might signal a reboot that embraces tradition again.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie, 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
Where does Rachel go from here? That's the million-dollar question. Her earlier roles garnered praise for raw talent and vocal ability, but the fiasco stuck so strongly that in the eyes of many, she's the actress who hammered away at Walt Disney's first princess. Some claim she never understood the cultural weight of Snow White. Others believe she got misguided PR cues from the studio to push a modern critique angle. And it backfired.
And just how once trusted critics that shilled for the Disney company all the time, even they are beginning to turn their back against them. That's how bad this movie truly is. Even if you look at the IMDb rating score, that's when you really know how terrible this movie is and how it really hit rock bottom.
Either way, fans scorn her stance, feeling that she took on a beloved character purely for the exposure while mocking the film that started it all. Still, Hollywood can have a short memory if an actor redeems themselves with fresh roles that overshadow old controversy.
Snow White's budget was around $240 to $270 million. It has made $43 million domestically so far and around $84 million globally per Box Office Pro.
Maybe Rachel will pivot to musicals or adult dramas that let her speak candidly without bruising a cherished brand. Or she might quietly vanish from mainstream Disney circles, focusing on projects where strong opinions are more acceptable. It's tough to see a quick redemption within the princess realm, though. She'd have to produce a heartfelt apology or show genuine love for the original cartoon, and many watchers doubt that would happen, or that fans would accept it after the fiasco.
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them.
To be fair, most fans acknowledge that older Disney cartoons have questionable spots when viewed through today's lens. But modernization typically goes over best when the lead acknowledges the original's accomplishments even as they adapt it for modern tastes. That's where many watchers say Rachel failed. Instead of praising Walt Disney's pioneering artistry while noting the need for contemporary updates, she went straight for mockery, acting as if the older film was naive or laughable.
And you have parents looking at Disney being like, what are you doing, guys? This is supposed to be a place where magic happens, and all you're doing is indoctrinating kids, and you're having this person be the poster child of the Democratic Party.
This fiasco signals a bigger trend. Audiences can handle progressive changes, but hate seeing old favorites treated as silly. If you treat a beloved cartoon from 1937 like it's worthless, don't expect fans to show up in droves. That logic stands not just for Snow White, but for any classic brand. Companies have to approach these reboots with a sense of stewardship, not a desire to burn it down. People love new angles, but they also crave some continuity with the stories that formed their childhood memories.
Destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars worth of IP for Disney, but she also has destroyed her career and the careers of anybody who worked on the movie.
Because of this fiasco, Disney may alter how they handle future reboots or revivals of older films. Some guess the studio will enforce stricter guidelines on how stars discuss legacy IP in interviews. Possibly they'll make them watch the original cartoon multiple times, ensuring they speak from a place of admiration. Cynical as that sounds, it might be the only way to avoid a fiasco on this scale again.
The producers, far left-wing activists in Hollywood, are turning on her, and Disney has canceled all of Rachel Zegler's appearances on their media platforms. Kind of tough.
If a brand new Snow White eventually surfaces, watchers expect it to revolve around old-school charm. Fans want dwarfs back in comedic form, the iconic songs lightly updated but still recognizable, and a lead who describes the 1937 movie with starry-eyed wonder. If that sounds sappy, well, that's precisely what many watchers missed this time around. And ironically, that might be how Disney eventually recovers from the fiasco, by doubling down on the fairy tale sweetness that Rachel seemed to find so embarrassing.
We'll still offend the dwarves, but we'll CGI dwarves. So we'll guarantee no employment for little people while getting rid of this other component that warranted CGI. It was the worst decision they could possibly make.
As for the streaming question, the fiasco taught the company that synergy can backfire if the film's overshadowed by negativity. So they might hold off on dumping it onto Disney+, at least until they figure out a new spin that can overshadow the fiasco. Maybe they'll bury it quietly or release it with zero fanfare, effectively letting the fiasco-laden version fade from memory while a fresh adaptation grabs the spotlight. That's a bold strategy, but given how fiercely fans reacted to this fiasco, it could be their best shot.
You could look at the fact that she has been sabotaging this film for years at this point, all in this sort of pursuit of entitlement.
Some watchers believe Disney will never fully bury a high-budget film. They spent the money, so they have to show it somewhere. But the fiasco set off a chain of negativity that might harm Disney+ if the platform's big banner reads "Watch." The Snow White fiasco featuring Rachel Zegler, prompting a fresh wave of boycotts or negative trending topics.
The more that she tries to defend this movie, the more that she tries to spew her agenda onto the general public, it's only making matters worse, not just for Bob Iger, but for whatever is left of the image of Disney as a whole.
The entire fiasco overshadowed the notion of a unifying Disney brand, which historically thrives on positivity and escapist delight. By potentially delaying or minimizing the film's presence on the platform, Disney distances the fiasco from its core streaming identity. That might be the lesser evil, especially if they're rolling out new content that they'd rather fans focus on. It's a gamble.
Jonah Platt, whose father helped produce the latest Snow White film, had some very harsh words for star Rachel Zegler.
For context, Variety wrote a report recently titled "Inside Disney's Snow White Fiasco: Death Threats, Beefed Up Security, and a Social Media Guru for Rachel Zegler."
Some fans might want to see the adaptation out of curiosity, but the risk of more negativity could outweigh those views. And let's be real, even if it eventually lands on Disney+, do they want that fiasco overshadowing the next big Marvel or Star Wars launch? Probably not. In the end, watchers talk about a second Snow White as if it's almost inevitable.
Evie Magazine wrote on X, "When you compare how Rachel Zegler spoke about Snow White to how other actresses who played live-action Disney princesses spoke about their character, really underlines just how poorly she carried herself. I am in the thick of rehearsals for Romeo plus Juliet, so I'm gonna get out of here. Bye for now."
The fiasco was so large that it might be easier for the studio to start over than to salvage a tarnished film. That means a new actress who, from day one, expresses genuine admiration for the 1937 gem, someone who can handle press tours gracefully, praising Walt's original vision instead of mocking it. Maybe they keep some modern touches, but keep them gentle and respectful.
The Variety story notes how a couple of minutes after posting this, she replied to her own tweet and wrote, "And always remember, free Palestine."
Variety breaks down how after this tweet went viral, the studio was shocked that she would mix a promo tweet with a political statement. As a result, Mark Platt flew to New York to speak with her in person.
Done right, that approach might recapture the big box office success and warm fan response that the fiasco-laden version missed. Rachel, meanwhile, is left out of that conversation. She might watch as a fresh face claims the spotlight and receives the adoration she forfeited by taking pot shots at the old storyline.
On the original production, I was scared of it. Oh, it was so weird. It was a stalker. Like, I feel like if you are taking on the most iconic Disney role ever, genuinely, like this was the most prolific Disney film, I feel like you should kind of have some sort of reverence for the original production.
That's how quickly public perception can shift. One day you're pegged as the next big Disney star, and the next day you're overshadowed by a fiasco that fans blame almost entirely on your attitude toward a beloved cartoon. It's an object lesson in how not to handle yourself if you want a fairy tale role to succeed. So, that's the reality. A classic property undone by one actress's dismissive approach. A studio uncertain if it should even put the film on its own streaming service, and fans clamoring for a do-over.
Narcissism is not something to be coddled or encouraged. Zegler isn't the only one who has made political statements, though. Her co-star Gal Gadot, who plays the Evil Queen, expressed her staunch support for Israel. The film received backlash for various reasons in the lead up to its release. Zegler had called the original Snow White movie dated and weird, and said Prince Charming was a stalker.
The fiasco reveals just how seriously people take Walt Disney's earliest treasures and how quickly they turn on a star who disrespects them. If Disney does indeed create a new Snow White, it'll have to distance itself from Rachel Zegler's commentary and prove that it cherishes the whimsical charm of 1937.
EV Magazine wrote on X, when you compare how Rachel Zegler spoke about Snow White to how other actresses who played live-action Disney princesses spoke about their character, really underlines just how poorly she carried herself.
Maybe they'll find a star who's excited about the old songs, the dwarfs, comedic interplay, and the innocent romance that sparked an entire era of animation. For Rachel, her path remains unclear. She might carve out a niche in roles that don't demand reverence for older material, or she might attempt a public apology explaining she never meant to scorn the original.
I'll quickly mention this. The son of Snow White producer Mark Platt, Jonah Platt is the son's name, he is speaking out publicly against Rachel Zegler and blaming her for the film's catastrophic failure at the box office. I mean, he's totally right.
In an industry built on reinvention, it's not impossible for her to recover eventually. But with Snow White specifically, the door seems all but closed for her, given how thoroughly fans have rejected her stance. Disney, for its part, is learning that star-driven controversies can overshadow even the mightiest of IP, especially when that IP is the one that started it all, the film that shaped generations' idea of what a princess story should be.
Now, of course, as we covered, the movie is terrible anyway in its own right. It was probably going to underperform regardless. People are tired of the soulless cash grab remake thing. The movie has all kinds of problems that could be pinned partly on the producer. Like, the producer did not do a good job. Nobody who produced this movie did a good job.
If they want to avoid more fiascos, they'll need to vet their stars carefully, ensuring no one steps on cherished legacies. Because if there's one thing fans have shown, it's that they expect the caretaker of their childhood memories to treat them with more than a hint of respect. For Snow White, the next chapter might come sooner than we think, just with a different face leading the charge, and a far kinder attitude toward the legacy that made her possible in the first place.